Chapter 7, Part 1 of The Planet Strappers. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Planet Strappers by Raymond Z. Gallun. Chapter 7, Part 1. Frank Nelson meant the journey to be vagabond escape, an interlude of to hell with it relief from the grind, and from the increasingly uncertain mainstream of the things he knew best. He rode with a long train of bubs, and great sheaves of smelted metal rods, tungsten, osmium, uranium-238. The sheaves had their own propelling ionic motors. He lazed like a tramp. He talked with asteroid hoppers who meant to spend some time on Earth. Several had become almost rich. Most had strong, quiet faces that showed both distance and home hunger. A few had broken, and the angry sensitivity was visible. Nelson treated himself well. He was relieved of the duty of eternal vigilance by men whose job it was. So, for a while, his purpose was almost successful. But the memory, or ghost, of Mitch Storey was never quite out of his mind, and as a tiny, at first telescopic crescent, with a rusty light enlarged with lessened distance ahead, the ugly enigma of present-day Mars dug deeper into his brain. Every 24 hours and 38 minutes, the length of the Martian day, whenever the blue-green wedge of Citrus Major appeared in the crescent, he beamed the survey station, which was still maintained for the increase of knowledge, and as a safeguard for incautious adventurers who will tackle any dangerous mystery or obstacle. His object was to talk to Nance Codiss. "I thought perhaps you and your group had gotten restless and had started out for the Belt already," he laughed during their first conversation. "Oh, no. A lab technician like me is far too busy here, for one thing," she assured him, her happy tone bridging the distance. "We came this far with a well-armed freight caravan, in good passenger quarters. If we went on, I suppose it would be the same. Anyway, for years you didn't worry much about me. Why now, Frank?" "A mystery," he teased in return. "Or, perhaps, because I considered Earth safe instinctively." But he was right in the first place. It was a mystery. Something to do with the startling news that she was on the way, that closer friendship was pending. The impulse to go meet her had been his first, almost thoughtless, impulse. He was still glad that she wasn't out between Mars and the Belt, where disaster had once hit him hard. But now he wondered if the survey station was any better for anybody, even though it was reputed to be quite secure. The caravan he rode approached his destination no closer than 10 million miles. Taking cautious note of radar data, which indicated that space all around was safely empty, he cast off in his Archer with a small, new, professional-type bub packed across his hips. Inside his helmet, he lighted a cigarette. Quite an unusual luxury. It took a long time to reach Phobos. They gave him shots there, new preventive medicine that was partially effective against the viruses of Mars. Descent in the winged rocket was rough, but then he was gliding with a sibilant whistle through a natural atmosphere again. Within minutes he was at the station. Low, dusty domes, many of them deserted. Now, at the edge of the airfield, a lazy spinning wind gauge, tractors, auto jeeps, several helicopters. He stepped down with his gear. Mars was all around him. A few ground-clinging growths nearby. Harmless, locally evolved vegetation. Distant coppery cliffs reflecting the setting sun. Ancient excavations notched them. Dun desert to the east, with little plumes of dust blowing. Through his Archer, a necessary garment here, not only because the atmosphere was only 1/10 as dense as Earth air and poor in oxygen, but because of the microscopic dangers it bore. Nelson could hear the faint sough of the wind. The 38% of terrestrial gravity actually seemed strong to him now, and made him awkward as he turned and looked west. Perhaps 2 miles off, past a barbed wire fence and what must be an old tractor trail of the hopeful days of colonization, he saw the blue-green edge of Syrtis Major, the greatest of the thickets, with here and there a jutting spur of it projecting toward him along a gully. Nelson's hide tingled, but his first glimpse was handicapped by distance. He saw only an expanse of low shagginess that might have been scrub growths of any kind. Dug into the salt-bearing ground at intervals, he knew, there were fire weapons ready to throw oxygen and synthetic napalm, jellied gasoline. Never yet had they been discharged along this defense line, but you could never be sure just what might be necessary here. A man of about 30 had approached. "I meet the new arrivals," he said. "If you'll come along with me, Mr. Nelson." He was dark and medium large, and had a genial way. He looked like a hopper, an asteroid miner, the tough, level-headed kind that adjusts to space and keeps his balance. "Name's Ed Huth," he continued as they walked to the reception dome. "Canadian. Good international crowd here, however long you mean to stay. Most interesting frontier in the solar system, too. Probably you've heard most of the rules and advice, but here's a paper. Refresh your memory by reading it over as soon as you can. There is one thing which I am required to show everybody who comes here. Inside this peak box. You are instructed to take a good look." Huth's geniality had vanished. The metal box was a yard high and twice as long and wide. It stood like a memorial before the reception dome entrance. A light shone beyond the glass-covered slot as Nelson bent to peer. He had seen horror before now. He had seen a pink mist dissolve in the sunshine as a man in armor out in the belt was hit by an explosive missile, his blood spraying and boiling. Besides, he had read up on the thickets of Mars, watched motion pictures, heard Gimp Hines' stories of his brief visit here. So at first he could be almost casual about what he saw in the peak box. There were many ghastly ways for a man to die. Even the thicket plant in the box seemed dead, though Nelson knew that plant successors to the original Martians had the rugged power of revival. This one showed the usual paper-dry whorls of leaves and the usual barrel body, perhaps common to arid country growths everywhere. Scattered over the barrel between the spines were glinting specks, vegetable, light-sensitive cells developed into actual visual organs. The plant had the usual tympanic pods of its kind, a band of muscle-like tissue stretched across a hollow interior by which it could make buzzing sounds. Nelson knew that, like any earthly green plant, it produced oxygen, but that, instead of releasing it, it stored the gas in spongy compartments within its horny shell, using it to support an animal-like tissue combustion to keep its vitals from freezing during the bitterly frigid nights. Nelson also knew that deeper within the thing was a network of whitish pulp, expanded at intervals to form little knobs. Sectioned under a microscope, they would look like fibered masses of animal or human nerve and brain cells, except that chemically they were starch and cellulose rather than protein. Worse to see was the rigid clutch of monsters' tactile organs, which grew from the barrel's crown. It was like a powerful man struggling to uproot a rock, or a bear or an octopus crushing an enemy. It was a dark hole drama, like something from another galaxy, like a horribly effective piece of sculpture. The tableau in the box preserved the last gasp of an incautious youth in armor. The tendrils of the thicket plant were furred with erect spines of a shiny russet color. They were so fine that they looked almost soft, but Nelson was aware that they were sharper than the hypodermic needles they resembled, in another approach to science. Now Nelson felt the tingling revulsion and hatred. "Of course, you know that you don't have to get caught like that poor bloke did," Huth said dryly. "Just not to disinfect the outside of your Archer well enough and then leave it near you indoors is sufficient. I was here before there was any trouble. When it came, it was a shambles." Huth eyed Nelson for a moment, then continued on another tack. "Biology. Given the whole universe to experiment in, I suppose you can never know what it will come up with, or what is possible. These devils, you get to hate them in your sleep. If their flesh or their methods were something like ours, as was the case with the original Martians or the people of the asteroid planet, it wouldn't seem so bad. Still, they make you wonder. What would you do if, in your own way, you could think and observe, but were rooted to the ground? If you were denied the animal ability of rapid motion? If you didn't have hands with which to fashion tools or build apparatus? If fire was something you could scarcely use? Nelsen smiled. "I am wondering," he said. "I promise to do a lot more of it as soon as I get squared away. I could inflate my bub and sleep in the yard in it if I had to. Then, as usual, off the Earth, you'd expect me to earn my breathing air and keep after a couple of days, whether I can pay instead or not. That's fine with me, of course. There's another matter which I'd like to discuss, but that can be later." "No sleeping out," Huth laughed. "That's just where people get careless. There are plenty of quarters available since the retreat of settlers almost emptied this world of terrestrial intrusion, except for us here and the die-hard desert rats and the new screwball adventurers. By the way, if it ever becomes important, the deserts are safe, at least from what you just saw, as you probably know." Nelsen passed through an airlock where live steam and a special silicon oil accomplished the all-important disinfection of his Archer, his bub, and the outside of his small sealed baggage roll. Armor and bub he left racked with rows of others. It wasn't until he got into the reception dome lounge that he saw Nance Codiss. She didn't rush at him. Reserve had dropped over them both again, as if in reconsideration of a contact made important too suddenly. He clasped her fingers, then just stood looking at her. Lately they had exchanged a few pictures. "Your photographs don't lie, Nance," he said at last. "Yours do, Frank," she answered with complete poise. "You look a lot less grim and tired." "Wait," he told her. "I'll be right back." He went with Ed Huth to ditch his role in his sleeping cubicle, get cleaned up, and change his clothes. She was beautiful. She had grave moods. She was wearing his fabulous bracelet, if only not to offend him. But when he returned, he met two of the girls who had come out to Mars with her, a nurse and another lab technician. They were the bubbly type, full of bravado and giggles for their strange new surroundings. For a moment he felt far too old at 24 for Nance's 20. He wondered regretfully if her being here was no more than part of his excuse for getting away from the Belt and from the sense of ultimate human disaster building up. But much of his feeling of separation from her disappeared as they sat alone in the lounge talking, first about Jarviston and then about here. Nance had available information about the thickets pretty well down pat. "You can't keep those plants alive here at the station, Frank," she said quietly. "They make study difficult by dying. It's as if they knew that they couldn't win here, so they retreat to keep their secrets. But Dr. Passetti, our head of medical research, says that we can never know that they won't find a way to attack us directly. That's what the waiting napalm line is for. I don't think he is exaggerating." "Why do you say that?" Nelsen asked. He was encouraging her, of course, but he wasn't being patronizing. Frost tingled in his nerves. He wanted to know her version. "I'll show you the little museum we have," she replied, her eyes widening slightly. "This is probably old hat to you, but it's weird. It gives you the creeps." He followed her along a covered causeway to another dome. In a gallery there, a series of dry specimens was set up inside sealed boxes made of clear plastic. The first display was centered around a tapered brass tube, perhaps one of the barrels of an antique pair of field glasses. Wrapping it was a spiny brown tendril from which grew two sucker-like organs shaped like acorn tops. One was firmly attached to the metal. The other had been pulled free, its original position on the barrel marked by a circular area of corrosion. The face of the detached sucker was also shown. a honeycomb structure of waxy vegetable tissue, detailed with thousands of tiny ducts and hair-like feelers. "Some settler dropped that piece of brass out on a trail in Citrus Major," Nance explained. "Later it was found like this. Brass is something that people have almost stopped using, so it was new to them. They wouldn't have been interested in magnesium, aluminum, or stainless steel anymore. The suckers aren't a usual part of them either, but the suckers grow for a special purpose, Dr. Pacetti believes. A test, perhaps an analysis. They exclude an acid to dissolve a little of the metal. It's like a human chemist working, only perhaps better, more directly, with specialized feelers and sensing organs." Nance's quiet voice had a slight, awed quaver at the end. Frank Nelsen nodded. He had examined printed pictures and data before this, but here the impact was far more real and immediate. The impact of strange minds with an approach of their own was more emphatic. "What else?" he urged. They stood before another sealed case containing a horny oval pod cut open. It had closed around a lump of greenish stone. "Malachite," Nance breathed. "One kind of copper ore. They reduced it, extracted some of the pure metal. See all the little reddish specks shining? It is pretty well established that the process is something like electroplating. There's a dissolving acid, then a weak electric current from a kind of battery. Oh, nobody should laugh, Frank. Dr. Pacetti keeps pointing out that there are electric eels on Earth with specialized muscle tissue that acts as an electric cell. But this is somewhat different. Don't ask me exactly how it functions. I only heard our orientation lecture while we toured this museum. But see those small compartments in the thick shells of the pod, with the membranes separating them? All of them contain fluids, some acid, others alkaline. Mixed in with the cellulose of the membranes, you can see both silvery and reddish specks, as if they had to incorporate both a conductor and a difference of metals to get a current. At least, that was what was suggested in the lecture." Frank Nelsen and Nance Codiss moved from display case to display case, each of which showed another kind of pod cut in half. The interiors were all different and all complicated. Membranes with faint metallic sheen, laminated or separated by narrow air spaces, as in a capacitor, for instance. Balls of massed fiber, glinting. Curious spiral formations of waxy tissue. "They use electricity as a minor kind of defense," Nance went on, her tone still low, with suppressed excitement that was close to dread. "We know that some of them can give you a shock, if you're fool enough to get so close that you can touch them. And they do emit radio impulses on certain wavelengths. Signals, communication? As for the rest, perhaps you'd better do your own guessing, Frank. But the difference between us and them seems to be that we make our apparatus. They grow them, build them, with their own living tissue cells, in a way that must be under their constant precise control. I suppose they even work from a carefully thought-out design, a kind of cryptic blueprint. Go along with the idea or not, as you choose. But our experts suspect that much of what we have here represents research apparatus, physical, chemical, electrical. That they may get closer to understanding the ultimate structure of matter than we can, because their equipment is part of themselves, in which they can develop senses that we don't possess. Well, I'll skip any more of that, because the best, or the worst, is still coming. Right here, Frank." The case showed several small, urn-like growths, sectioned like the other specimens. Frank Nelsen grinned slightly. "All right, let me tell it," he said, "because this is something I've really paid attention to. Like you imply, their equipment is alive, so they work best with life, viruses, germs, vegetable allergy substances. These are their inventing, developing, and brewing bottles for the numerous strains of Serratus fever virus. The living molecule chains split off from the inner tissue walls of the bottles and grow and multiply in the free fluid. At least, that's how I read it." "And that is where my lab job begins, Frank," she told him. "Helping develop antivirus shots, testing them on bits of human tissue growing in a culture bath. An even partially effective antivirus isn't found easily. And when it is, another virus strain will soon appear, and the doctors have to start over. Oh, the need isn't as great any more as when the great rush away from Mars was on. There are only half a dozen really sick people in the hospital now. Latecomers and snoopers who got careless or curious. You've got to remember that the virus blows off the thickets like invisible vapor. There's one guy from Idaho, James Scanlon. Come along, I'll show you, Frank." He lay behind plastic glass in a small cubicle. A red rash with the pattern of frostwork on a Minnesota window pane in January was across his lean, handsome face. Maybe he was 20, Nance's age. His bloodshot eyes stared at terrors that no one else could see. Nance called softly through the thin infection barrier. "Jimmy?" He moaned a little. "Francie?" "High fever, Frank," Nance whispered. "Typical Syrtis. He wants to be home with his girl. I guess you know that nostalgia, yearning terribly for old familiar surroundings, is a major symptom. It's like a command from them to get out of Mars. The red rash is something extra he picked up, an allergy. Oh, we think he'll survive. Half of them now do. He's big and strong. Right now, even the nurses don't go in there, except in costumes that are as infection-tight as armor. Later on, when the fever dwindles to chronic intermittence, it will no longer be contagious. Even so, the new laws on Earth won't let him return there for a year. I don't know whether such laws are fair or not. We've got 100 here who were sick and are now stranded and waiting, working at small jobs. Others have gone to the Belt, which seems terrible for someone not quite well. I hope that Jimmy bears up all right. He's such a kid. Let's get out of here." Her expression was gently maternal. Or maybe it was something more. Back in the lounge, she asked, "What will you do here, Frank?" "Whatever it is, there is one thing I want to include," he answered. "I want to try and find out just what happened to Mitch Storey." "Natch, I remember him. So I looked the incident up. He disappeared deep in Syrtis Major over 3 years ago. He carried a sick settler in on foot. He always seemed lucky or careful or smart. After he got lost, his wife, a nurse from here, whose name had been Selma Washington, went looking for him. She never was found either." "Oh," Nelsen said in mild startlement. "Yes. Talk to Ed Huth. There are still helicopter patrols watching for signs of a long list of missing people and keeping tabs on latecomers who might turn out to be screwballs. You look as though you might be Ed's type for that kind of work. I have to go now, Frank. Duty in half an hour." Huth was grinning at him a little later. "This department doesn't like men who have a vanished friend, Nelsen," he said. "It makes their approach too heroically personal. On the other hand, some of our lads seem underzealous nowadays. If you can live up to your successful record in the Belt, maybe you're the right balance. Let's try you." End of Chapter 7, Part 1. Chapter 7, Part 2 of The Planet Strappers. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Planet Strappers by Raymond Z. Gallun. Chapter 7, Part 2. For a week, about all Nelsen did was ride along with Huth in the heli. At intervals, he'd call, Mitch Storey, into his helmet phone. But of course, that was no use. He couldn't say that he didn't see Mars from a safe altitude of 2,000 feet. The vast empty deserts, where, fairly safe from the present dominant form of Martian life, a few adventurers and archaeologists still rummaged among the rust heaps of climate control and other machines, and among the blasted debris of glazed ceramic cities, still faintly tainted with radioactivity, where the original inhabitants had died. The straight ribbons of thicket growths crossing even the deserts, carrying in their joined hollow roots the irrigation water of the otherwise mythical canals, the huge south polar cap of hoarfrost melting, blackening the soil with brief moisture while the frost line retreated towards the highlands. Syrtis itself, where the trails, once burned out with oxygen and gasoline jelly to permit the passage of vehicles, had again become completely overgrown. Who could hope to stamp out that devilishly hardy vegetation, propagating by means of millions of wind-blown spores, with mere fire? The broken-down trains of tractors and trailers, now almost hidden. The stellene garden domes that had flattened. Here were the relics left by people who had sought to spread out to safety, to find old goals of freedom from fear. Several times in Citrus, Huth and Nelsen descended, using a barren hillock or an isolated spot of desert as a landing area. That was when Nelsen first heard the buzzing of the growths. Twice, working warily with machetes and holding their flame weapons ready, they chopped armored mummies from enwrapping tendrils, while little eye cells glinted at them balefully, and other tendrils bent slowly toward them. They searched out the space fitness cards, which bore old dates and addresses of next of kin. In a few more days, Nelsen was flying the copter. Then he was out on his own, watching, searching. For a couple of weeks he hangared the heli at once after each patrol, and Nance always was there to meet him as he did so. Inevitably the evening came when he said, "We could fly out again, Nance, for an hour or two. It doesn't break any rules." Those evening rides, high over Syrtis Major, toward the setting sun, became an every other day custom, harmless in itself. A carefully kept nuclear battery motor didn't conk. The vehicle could almost fly without guidance. It was good to look down at the blue-green shagginess below. Familiarity bred, not contempt, but a decline of dread to the point where it became a pleasant thrill, an overtone to the process of falling in love. Otherwise, perhaps they led each other on, into incaution. Out in the lonely fastness of Mars, they seemed to find the sort of peace and separation from danger on the hectic Earth that settlers had sought here. "We always pass over that same hill," Nance said during one of their flights. "It must have been a beautiful little island in the ancient ocean, when there was that much water. Now it belongs to us, Frank." "It's barren. We could land," Nelsen suggested quickly. They visited the hill a dozen times safely, breaking no printed rule. But maybe they shouldn't have come so often to that same place. In life there is always a risk, which is food for a fierce soul. Frank Nelsen and Nance Codiss were fierce souls. They'd stand by the heli and look out over Citrus, their gloved fingers entwined. If they couldn't kiss here through their helmets, that was merely comic pathos. Another thing to laugh and be happy over. "Our wind-blown hill," Nance chuckled on that last evening, looking down over a culture, a history, maybe arguments, lawsuits, jokes, parties, gossip too for all we know, disguised as a huge briar patch that makes funny noises. "Shut up. I love you," Nelsen gruffed. "Shut up yourself. It's you I love," she answered. The little sun was half sunk behind the horizon. The copter was only 100 feet away along the hill crest. That's when it happened. Two dull, plopping sounds came almost together. If a thinking animal can use the pressure of confined gas to propel small missiles, is there any reason why other intelligences can't do the same? From two bottle-like pods, the clusters of darts, or long, sharp thorns, were shot. Only a few of them struck their targets. Fewer still found puncturable areas, and struck through silicone rubber and fine steel wire cloth into flesh. Penetration was not deep, but deep enough. Nance screamed. Nelsen wasn't at all sure that he didn't scream himself, as the first anguish dizzied and half blinded him. From the start, it was really too late. Nelsen was as hardy and determined as any. He tried to get Nance to the copter. Less than halfway, she crumpled. With a savage effort of will, he managed to drag her a few yards before his legs refused to obey him or support him. His blood carried a virus to his brain about as quickly as it would have carried a cobra's venom. They probably could have made such protein poisons too, but they had never used them against men, no doubt because something that could spread and infect others was better. For a while, as the black star-shot night closed in, Nelsen knew or remembered nothing at all, unless the mental distortions were too horrible. Then he seemed to be in a pit of stinking, viscous fluid, alive with stringy unknowns that were boring into him. Unreachable in another universe was a town called Jarviston. He yelled till his wind was gone. He had a half-lucid moment in which he knew it was night, and understood that he had a raging fever. He was still clinging to Nance, who clung to him, so instinct still worked. He saw that they had blundered. Its black bulk was visible against the stars. Phobos hadn't risen. Deimos, the farther moon, was too small to furnish appreciable light. Something touched him from behind, and he recoiled, pushing Nance back. He yanked the machete from his belt and struck blindly. Oh no, you didn't get caught like this. Not usually, he told himself. Not in their actual grip. They were too slow. You could always dodge. It was only when you were near something not properly disinfected that you got Syrtis fever. Which was the worst that could happen, wasn't it? He heard an excited rhythm in the buzzing. Now he remembered his shoulder lamp, fumbled to switch it on, failed, and stumbled a few steps with Nance toward the hill. Something caught his feet, then hers. Trying to get her free, he dropped his machete. Huth's voice spoke in his helmet phone. "We hear you, Nelsen. Hold on. We'll be there in 40 minutes. "Yeah, 40 minutes. It's silly to be scared, Frankie," he heard Nance stammer, almost apologetically. "Dear Nance." Screaming, he kicked out again and again with his heavy boots, and got both her and himself loose. It wasn't any good. A shape loomed near them. A thing that must have sprung from them, some way. A huge zombie form. The ugliest part of this night of anguish and distortion. But he was sure that it was real. The thing struck him in the stomach. Then there was a biting pain in his shoulder. There wasn't any more, just then. But this wasn't quite the end, either. The jangled impressions were like split threads of consciousness, misery racked and tenuous. They were widely separated. His brain seemed to crack into a million needle-pointed shards that made no sense except to indicate the passage of time. A month? A century? It seemed that he was always struggling impossibly to get himself and Nance somewhere, out of hot, noisome holes of suffocation, across deserts, up endless walls, and past buzzing sounds that were mixed incongruously with strange harmonic music that seemed to express all time and space. He could never succeed, though the need was desperate. But sometimes there was a coolness answering his thirst, or rubbed into his burning skin, and he would seem to sleep. Often, voices told him things, but he always forgot. It wasn't true that he came out of the hot fog suddenly, but it seemed that he did. He was sitting in dappled sunshine in an ordinary lawn chair of tubular magnesium, with a back and bottom of gaudy fabric. Above him was a narrow, sealed roof of stellene. The stone walls showed the beady fossils of prehistoric Mars. More than probably, these chambers had been cut in the living rock by the ancients. Reclining in another lawn chair beside him was Nance, her eyes closed, her face thin and pale. He was frightened, until he remembered, somehow, that she was nearly as well as he was. Beyond her was a doorway leading into what seemed a small, modern kitchen. There was a passage to a small, neat garden where earthly vegetables and flowers grew. It was sealed with stellene. Its walls were solid rock. Looking up through the transparent roof above him, He saw how a thin mesh of fuzzy tendrils and whorls masked this strange Shangri-La. Nelsen closed his eyes and thought back. Now he remembered most of what he had been told. "Mitch," he called quietly, so as not to awaken Nance. "Hey, Mitch, Selma." Mitch Storey was there in a moment, dressed in dungarees and work shirt like he used to be, but taller, even leaner and unsmiling. Nelsen got up. "Thanks, Mitch," he said. Their voices stayed low and intense. "For nothing, Frank. I'm damn glad to see you, but you still shouldn't have come nosing. 'Cause I've told you why, looking for you. Huth burned out more than 5 square miles, and if folks get too smart and too curious, it won't be any good for what's here." Nelsen felt angry and exasperated, but he had a haunting thought about a lanky colored kid in Jarviston, Minnesota, a guy with a dream, or perhaps a prescient glimpse of his own future. "What's a pal supposed to do?" he growled. "For a hell of a long time you've answered nobody, though everyone in the bunch must have tried beaming you." "Sure, Frank, blame from me would be way out of line. I heard you guys lots of times. But it was best to get lost. Maybe help keep the thickets like they are for as long as possible. A while back, I began picking up your voice in my phones again. I figured you were heading for trouble when you kept coming with your girl to that same hill. So I was around, like I told you before. Sorry I had to hit you and give you the needle, but you were nuts, gone with Syrtis. Getting you back here without Huth spotting the old heli I picked up once at a deserted settlers camp was real tough going. I had to land, hide it, and wait 4 or 5 times. And you were both plenty sick. But there are a few medical gimmicks I learned from the thickets, better than those at the station." "You've done all right for yourself here, haven't you, Mitch?" Nelsen remarked with a dash of mockery. "All the modern conveniences, in the middle of the forbidden wilds of Syrtis Major." "Sure, Frank, 'cause maybe I'm selfish. Though it's just stuff that settlers left behind. Anyway, it wasn't so good at the start. I was careful, but I got the fever too, light. Then I fell, broke my leg out there. I thought sure I was finished when they got hold of me. But I just lay there, playing on my mouth organ, an old hymn, inside my helmet. Maybe it was the music. They must have felt the radio impulses of my tooting before, or else they knew somehow that I was on their side, that I figured they were too important just to disappear, and that I meant to do anything I could short of killing to keep them all right. Nope, I wouldn't say that they were so friendly, but they might have thought I'd be useful, a guinea pig to study or otherwise. For all I know, examining my body may have helped them improve their weapons. Anyhow, you won't believe this, 'cause it's sort of fantastic, but you know they work best with living tissue. They fixed that leg, bound it tight with tendrils, went through the steel cloth of my Archer with hollow thorns. The bone knit almost completely in 4 days, and the fever broke. Then they let me go. Selma was already out looking for me. When I found her, she had the fever too, but I guess we're immune now." Storey's quiet voice died away. "What are you going to do, Mitch? Just stay here for good?" "What else, if I can? This is better than anything I remember. Peaceful, too. If they study me, I study them. Not like a real scientist, but by just having them close around, I even got to know some of their buzzing talk. Maybe I'll have to be their ambassador to human folks sometime. They are from the planets of the stars, Frank. Sirius, I think. Tough little spores can be ejected from one atmosphere and drift in space for millions of years. They arrived after the first Martians were extinct. Now that you're here, Frank, I wish you'd stay, but that's no good. Somebody lost always makes people poke around." Nelsen might have argued a few points, but for one thing he felt too tired. "I'll buy it all your way, Mitch," he said. "I hope Nance and I can get out of here in a couple more days. Maybe I shouldn't have run out on the belt. Can't run. Thoughts follow you. But now, damn it, I want to go home." "That's regular, Frank, 'cause you've got the Syrtis. Chronic, now intermittent. But it'll fade. Same with your girl. Meanwhile, they won't let you go Earthside, but you'll be okay. I'll fly you out close enough to the station to get back any morning before daylight that you pick. Only you won't tell, will you, Frank?" "No, I promise. If you think secrecy makes any difference. Otherwise, thanks for everything. By the way, do you ever listen in on outside news?" "Enough. Still quiet. And a fella named Miguel Ramos, with nerve-controlled clamps for hands, got a new special bub and took off for Pluto." "No. Damn fool. Almost as loony as you are, Mitch." "Less. Wake up, Nance. Dinner, chicken, raised right here." That same afternoon, Frank Nelsen and Nance Codiss sat in the garden. "If I blur, just hold me tight, Frankie," she said. "Everything is still too strange to quite get a grip on, yet. But I'm not going home, Frank, not even when it is allowed. I set out, I'm sticking, I'm not turning tail. It's what people have got to do, in space more than ever." Even when the seizure of fever came, and the sweat gathered on her lips, and her eyes went wild, she gritted her teeth and just clung to him. She had spunk, admirable, if perhaps destructive. "Love you, Frank," kept saying. "Love you, sweetie." 2 days later, before the frigid dawn, they saw the last of Mitch Storey and his slender, beautiful wife with her challenging brown eyes. "Be careful that you do right for Mitch and these folks," she warned, almost commandingly, as the old heli landed in the desert a few miles from the station. "What would you do if outsiders came blundering into your world by the hundreds, making trails, killing you with fire? At first, they didn't even fight back." The question was ancient but valid. In spite of his experiences, Nelsen agreed with the logic and the justice. "We'll make up a story, Selma," he said solemnly. Mitch looked anxious. "Human people will find a way, won't they, Frank?" he asked. "To win, to come to Mars and live. I mean, to change everything. Sure, some will be sympathetic, but when there's practical pressure, needs, danger, economics..." "I don't know, Mitch," Nelsen answered in the same tone as before. "Your thickets do have a pretty good defense." But in his heart, he suspected that fierce human persistence couldn't be stopped, as long as there were humans left. Mitch and his starfolk couldn't withdraw from the mainstream of competition, inherent in life, that was spreading again across the solar system. They could only stand their ground, take their fearful chances, be part of it. "One last thing," Mitch said, was, "Got any cigarettes, Frank? Selma likes one once in a while." "Sure, 3 packs here inside my Archer. Mighty small hospitality gift, Mitch." After the copter drifted away, it seemed that a curtain drew over Nelsen's mind, blurring the whole memory. It was as though they had planned that. It was almost as though Mitch and Selma, as he had just seen them, were just another mind fantasy of the heebie-jeebie planet, created by its present masters. "Should we believe it?" Nance whispered. "My cigarettes are gone," Frank told her. At the survey station, they got weary looks from Ed Huth. "I guess I picked the wrong man, Nelsen," he said. "It looks as though you did, Ed," Frank replied. "I'm really sorry." They got worse hell from a little doctor from Italy, whose name was Pachetti. They were asked a lot of questions. They fibbed some, but not entirely. "We sort of blanked out, Doctor," Nance told him. "I suppose we spent most of our time in the desert, living in our Archers. There were the usual distorted hallucinations of Syrtis Fever. A new strain, I suspect. 4 months gone. Oh, no." She must have had a time evading his questions for the next month while she worked again in the lab. Maybe he did divine half of the truth at last. Maybe he even was sympathetic toward the thickets that he was trying to defeat. Nelsen wasn't allowed to touch another helicopter. During that month, between brief but violent seizures of the fever, he was employed as a maintenance mechanic. Then the news came. There had been an emergency call from Palestine. Rescue units were to be organized and rocketed out in high-velocity UNSF and USSF bubs. There had been sabotage, violence. The town was 3/4 gone above the surface. planned attack or, almost worse, merely the senseless result of space-poisoned men kicking off the lid in a spree of hell-raising humor and fun? Nelsen was bitter, but he also felt the primitive excitement, almost an eagerness, that was the savage paradox in life. "You still have the dregs of Syrtis Fever," a recruiting physician told him, "but you know the belt. That makes a big difference. All right, you're going." Nance Codiss didn't have the experience. Her lab background wasn't enough, so she was stuck on Mars. Nelsen had been pestering her to marry him. Now, in a corner of the crowded lounge, she tried again. But she shook her head. "You still have to leave me, Frank," she told him, "because that's the way strong people have to be when there's trouble to be met. Let's wait. Let's know a little better where we're at, please, darling. I'll be all right. Contact me when you can." Her tone was low and tender and unsteady. He hugged her close. Soon he was aboard a GO rocket, shooting up to Phobos to join the assembling rescue team. He wondered if this was the beginning of the end. End of Chapter 7, Part 2. Chapter 8, Part 1 of The Planet Strappers. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Planet Strappers by Raymond Z. Gallun. Chapter 8, Part 1. Frank Nelsen missed the first shambles at Palestine, of course, since even at high speed, the rescue unit with which he came did not arrive until days after the catastrophe. There had been hardly any warning, since the first attack had sprung from the sublevels of the city itself. A huge tank of liquid oxygen and another tank of inflammable synthetic hydrocarbons to be used in the manufacture of plastics had been simultaneously ruptured by charges of explosive, together with a heavy safety partition between them. The resulting blast and fountain of fire had jolted even the millions of tons of Pallas's mass several miles from its usual orbit. The sack of the town had begun at once, from within, even before chunks of asteroid material, man-accelerated and aimed, had begun to splatter blossoms of incandescence into the confusion of deflating domes and dying inhabitants. Other vandal bands had soon landed from space. The first hours of trying to regain any sort of order during the assault, and after it was finally beaten off, must have been heroic effort almost beyond conception. Local disaster units, helped by hoppers and citizens, had done their best. Then many had turned to pursuit and revenge. After Nelsen's arrival, his memory of the interval of acute emergency could have been broken down into a series of pictures in which he was often active. First, the wreckage, which he helped to pick up, like any of the others. Palestine had been like a froth on a stone, a castle on a floating, golden crag. It had been a flimsy, hastily built mushroom city, with a beautiful, tawdry splendor that had seemed out of place, a target shining for thousands of miles. Ha ha! Nelsen could almost hear the coarse laughter of the jolly lads as they broke it up, robbed it, raped it, because they both sneered at its effeteness and missed what it represented to them. Nelsen remembered very well how a man's attitudes can be warped while he struggled for mere survival in an Archer drifting in space. Yet even as he worked with the others to put up temporary domes and to gather the bloated dead, the hatred arose in him and was strengthened by the fury and grief in the grim, strong faces around him. To exist where it was, Palestine could not be as soft as it seemed, and to the hoppers, the rugged, level-headed ones who deserved the name, it had meant much, though they had visited it only for a few days of fun now and then. The jolly lads had been routed. Some must have fled chuckling and cursing almost sheepishly, like infants the magnitude of whose mischief had surpassed their intentions, and has awed and frightened them at last. They had been followed even before the various late-coming space forces could get into action. Nelsen overheard words that helped complete the pictures. "I'll get them. They had my wife." "This was planned. You know where." It was planned all right, but if Ceres, the Tovi colony, had actually been the instigator, there was evidence that the scheme had gotten out of hand. The excitement of destruction had spread. Stories came back that Ceres had been attacked too. "I killed a man, Frank, with this pre-asteroidal knife. He was after Helen and my son." This was timid David Lester talking, awed at himself, proud, but curiously ashamed. This made another picture. By luck, the Lesters lived in the small above-surface portion of Paleston that had not been seriously damaged. Frank Nelsen also killed during a trip to Post 1 of the KRNH Enterprises to get more stellene and other materials to expand the temporary encampments for the survivors. He killed 2 fleeing men coldly and at a distance because they did not answer his hail. The shreds of their bodies and the loot they had been carrying were scattered to drift in the vacuum, adding another picture of retribution to thousands like it. Belt Parnay was the name of the leader whom everybody really wanted to get. Belt Parnay, another Fessler, another Fanshawe. This was a curious thing. There was another name and face, but as far as could be told, the personality was very similar. It was as if, out of the darker side of human nature, a kind of reincarnation would always take place. They didn't get Parnay. Inevitably, considering the enormity of space, many of the despoilers of Palestin escaped. The shrewdest, the most experienced, the most willing to shout and lead and let others do the dangerous work, had the advantage, for they also knew how to run and hide and be prudently quiet. Parnay was one of these. Some captives were recovered. Others were found murdered. Fortunately, Palestin was still largely a man's city, but pursuit and revenge still went on. Post 1 was intact. Art Kuzak had surrounded it with a cordon of tough and angry asteroid hoppers. It was the same with the other posts, except 5 and 9, which were wiped out. "Back at last, huh, Nelsen?" Art roared angrily as soon as Frank had entered his office. "A fact we should accept, not discuss," Nelsen responded dryly. "You know the things we need." "Uh-huh, Nelsen. To rescue and restore Palestin, when it's pure nonsense, only inviting another assault. When we know that dispersal is the only answer. The way things are, everywhere, the whole damned human race needs to be dispersed, if some of it is to survive." It made another picture. Art Kuzak, the old friend, gone somewhat too big for his oversized britches, perhaps. No doubt, Art had had to put aside some grandiose visions, considering the turn that events had taken. Whole asteroids moved across the distance and put into orbit around the Earth, so that their mineral wealth could be extracted more conveniently. Space resorts established for tourists. New sports made possible by zero gravity, invented and advertised. Art Kuzak had the gift of both big dreaming and of practice. He had talked of such things before. Nelsen's smirk was wry. "Dispersal for survival, I agree," he said. "When they tried to settle Mars, it was being mentioned. Also, long before that. Your wisdom is not new, Art. It wasn't followed, perhaps, because people are herding animals by instinct. Anyhow, our side has to hold what it has really got. 1/4 of Palestin above the surface, and considerably more underground, including shops, installations, and 70% of its skilled inhabitants determined to stay in the belt after the others were killed or wounded or ran away. Unless you've quit claiming to be a practical man, Art, you'll have to go along with helping them. You know what kind of materials and equipment are needed, and how much we can supply, better than I do, or do I have to withdraw my fraction of the company in goods? We'll take up the dispersal problem as soon as possible." Art Kuzak could only sigh heavily, grin a lopsided grin, and produce. Soon a great caravan of stuff was on the move. There was another picture. Eileen Sands, the old Queen of Serene, in a not yet forgotten song, sitting on a lump of yellow alloy splashed up from the surface of Pallas, where a chunk of mixed metal and stone had struck at a speed several miles per second, fusing the native alloy and destroying her splendid second stop utterly in a flash of incandescence. Back in Archer, she looked almost as she used to look at Hendricks. Her smile was rueful. "Shucks, I'm all right, Frank," she said. "Even if insurance, with so many disaster claims, can't pay me, which they probably still can, the boys'll keep needing entertainment, if it's only in a stellene space tent. They won't let me just sit. For 2 bits, though, I'd move into a nice safe orbit, out of the belt, and on the other side of the sun from Earth, and build myself a retreat and retire. I'd become a spacewoman, like I wanted to in the first place." "I'll bet," Nelsen joshed. "Otherwise, what have you heard and seen? There's a certain fella..." Right away she thought he meant Ramos. "That damn fool, why ask me, Frank?" She sniffed, her expression sour and sad. "How long has he been gone again, now?" As usual, he was proposing for the first few days after he set out. After that, there were a few chirps of messages, then practically nothing. Anyway, how long does it take to get way out to Pluto and back, even if a whole man can have the luck to make it? And is there much more than half of him left? For 2 bits, I'd, skip it." Nelsen smiled with half of his mouth. "I wanted to know about Ramos, too, Eileen. Thanks. But I was talking about Tiflin." You're right. He and pal Igor were both around at my place about an hour before we were hit. I called him something worse than a bad omen. He was edgy, almost like he used to be. He said that, one of these days, be cavalier. I was going to get mine. He and Igor eeled away before my customers could break their necks. Nelsen showed his teeth. "Thanks again. I wondered," he said. He stayed in Palestine until, however patched it looked, it was functioning as the center of the free, if rough and tumble part of the belt once more. Though he didn't know for how long this would be true. Order of one kind had been fairly restored. But out of the disaster, and something very similar on Ceres, the thing that had always been most feared had sprung. It was the fact of opposed organized might in close proximity in the region between Pallas and Ceres. Again, there was blaming and counter-blaming about incidents, the exact source of which never became clear. What each of the space forces, patrolling opposite each other, had in the way of weapons was, of course, no public matter either. But how do you rate 2 inconceivables? Nor did the threat stay out in the vastness between the planets. From Earth came the news of a gigantic incandescent bubble rising from the floor of the Pacific Ocean, and spreading in almost radioactive free waves and ripples, disrupting penned-in areas of food-producing sea, and lapping at last at far shores. Both sides disclaimed responsibility for the blast. Everybody insisted hopefully that this latest danger would die down too. Statesmen would talk, official tempers would be calmed, some new working arrangements would be made. But meanwhile, the old sword of Damocles hung by a thinner hair than ever before. One trigger-happy individual might snap it for good. If not now, the next time, or the next. A matter of hours, days, or years. The mathematics of probabilities denied that luck could last forever. In this thought, there was a sense of helplessness and the ghost of a second asteroid belt. Frank Nelsen might have continued to make himself useful in Palestine, or he might have rejoined the Cusacks, who had moved their mobile posts back into a safer zone on the other side of Pallas. But his instincts now all pointed along another course of action, the only course that seemed to make any sense just then. He approached Art Cusack at Post 1. "About deployment," he began. "I've made up some sketches, showing what I'd like the factories to turn out. The ideas aren't new. Now they're springing up all around like thoughts of food in a famine. If anything will approach answering all problems, they will. And KRNH is as well able to put them into effect as anybody. So, unless you've got some better suggestions..." Art Kuzak looked the sketches over shrewdly for half an hour. "All right, Frank," he said, after some further conversation. "It looks good enough. I'll chip in. Whether they're sucker bait or not, these things will sell. Only, could it be you're running away?" "Perhaps," Nelsen answered. "Or following my nose, by a kind of natural compulsion which others will display too. 200 of these to start. The men going with me will pay for theirs. I'll cover the rest of this batch. You'd be better than I am at figuring out prices and terms for later batches. Just on a hunch, I'll always want a considerable oversupply. Post One's shops can turn them out fast. All they are, mostly, is just stellene, arranged in a somewhat new way. The fittings, whatever can't be supplied now, can follow." 50 asteroid hoppers, 10 of them accompanied by wives, went with Nelsen as he started out with a loaded caravan toward an empty region halfway between the orbits of Earth and Mars. Everyone in the group was convinced by yearnings of his own. Thinking of Nance Codiss, Nelsen planned to keep within beam range of the Red Planet. He had called Nance quite often. She was still working in the Survey Station Hospital and was swamped with injured from Palestine. Nelsen could tag all of the fierce drives in him with single words. Home was the first. After all his years away from Earth, the meaning of the word would have been emphatic in him, even without the recurrent spasms of hot-cold weakness, which, though fading, still legally denied him the relief of going back to old familiar things. Besides, Earth seemed insecure. So he could only try to make home possible in space. Remembering his first trip, long ago, from the Moon to Mars, he knew how gentle the big vacuum could sometimes seem, with just a skin of stellene between it and himself. Home was a plain longing, too, in the hard, level eyes around him. Love, well, wasn't that part of the first item he had tagged? Wanderlust, the adventurous, distant drive, part of any wild-blooded vagabond male. Here, in his idea, this other side of a human paradox seemed possible to answer to. You could go anywhere. Home went with you. Your friends could go along, if they wished. Freedom. In the billions of cubic miles could any system ever be big enough to pen you in, tell you what to think or do, as long as you hurt no one? Well, he thought not, but perhaps that remained to be seen. Safety. Deployment was supposed to be the significant factor there, and how could you make it any better than it was going to be now, even if there were new dangers? The future. There was no staying with the past. The Earth was becoming too small for its expanding population. It was a stifling, dangerous little world that, if the pressures were not relieved, might puff into fire and fragments at any moment during any year. And the era of prospecting and exploration in the asteroid belt seemed destined soon to come to an end in any event. Frank Nelsen's drives were very strong, after so much had passed around him for so long a time. Thus, maybe, he became too idealistic, and at moments almost fanatically believing without enough of the saving grain of doubt and humor. The hoppers with him were much like himself, singly directed by what they had lacked for years. The assembly operation was quickly accomplished, as soon as they were what they considered a safe distance from the belt. On a greater scale, it was almost nothing more than the first task that Nelsen had ever performed in space, the jockeying of a bub from its blast-off drum, inflating it, rigging it, spinning it for centrifugal gravity, and fitting in its internal appointments. Nelsen looked at the 50-odd stellene rings that they had broken out of their containers. The others, still packed, were held in reserve. Those that had been freed glistened translucently in the sunlight. Nelsen had always thought that bubs were beautiful, and these were still bubs, but they were bigger, safer, more complicated. A bantam-sized hopper named Hank Jans spoke from beside Nelsen as they floated near each other. "Pop, Zizzle, and it's yours, Chief. A prefab, a house, a dwelling. A kitchen, a terrace, a place for a garden, a place for kids even. With a few personal touches, you've got it made. Better than the house trailer my dad used to hook onto the jalopy when I was 10. My Alice likes it too, Chief. That's the real signal. Tell your pals Kuzak that this is the idea of the century." Frank Nelsen kind of thought so too, just then. The first thing he did was to beam the survey station on Mars, like he was doing twice a week. To communicate more often would have courted the still dangerous chance of being pinpointed. For similar reasons, he couldn't explain too clearly what his project was, but he hoped that he had gotten a picture of what it was like across to his girl. "Come see for yourself, Nance," he said enthusiastically. "I'll arrange for a caravan from Post 1 to stop by on Phobos and pick you up. Also, there's my old question. So what will it be, Nance? Maybe we can feel a little surer of ourselves now. We can work the rest out. Come and look, hang around, see how everything shakes down, if you'd rather." He waited for the light minutes to pass before he could hear her voice. "Hello, Frank." There was the same eager quaver. "Still pretty jammed, Frank, but we know about it here, from Art. Some of the Palestine convalescents will be migrating your way. I'll wrangle free and come along, maybe in about a month." He didn't know quite whether to take her at her word, or whether she was somehow hedging. In the big vacuum, the human mind seemed hard put quite to know itself. Distances and separations were too great. Emotions were too intense or too stunned. This much he had learned to understand. Perhaps he had lost Nance, but maybe still, in some bleak, fatalistic way, it would be just as well in the end, for them both. "Sure, Nance," he said gently. "I'll call again, the regular time." Right after that, he was talking, over a much greater span, to Art Kuzak. "First phase about completed, Art. Finger to thumb, in spite of the troubles elsewhere. So, let it roll." Art Kuzak's reply had an undercurrent of jubilance, as if whatever he knew now was better than he had expected. "Second phase is en route. Joe will be along. Don't be surprised." Joe Kuzak's approach a few hundred hours later made a luminous cluster in the sky, like a miniature galaxy. It resolved itself into vast bales and all of the stellene rings, storage and factory of Post 3. Also, there were over 100 men and 33 wives. Many of them were Palestine refugees. Nelsen helped Joe through the airlock of the ring that he had hoped would be his and Nance's. "Bubtown, huh, Frank?" Joe chuckled. "The idea is spreading faster than we had believed, and we aren't the only ones that have got it. The timing is just right. People are scared, fed up. Out here and on Earth, too. Most of the guys that are single in this crowd have girls who will be on their way soon. Some of the tougher space fitness tests are being junked. We're even screening a small batch of runaways from Ceres to be included in the next load. An experiment, but it should work out. They're just like anybody. Art is all of a sudden a liberal, the way he gets when things seem to break right." Everything went fine for quite a while. Art Kuzak was out playing his hunches, giving easy terms to those who couldn't pay at once. "Might as well gamble," he growled from the distance. "Space and terrestrial forces are still poised. If we lose it all, we lose the whole works anyway. So let's bring them from all around the belt, from Earth, Venus, and from wherever they'll come. Give them a place to work, or let them start their own deal. It all helps. You know what I hear? The Tovies are letting men do things by themselves. To hold their own in room as big as this, they have to. Their bosses are over a barrel. Just organized discipline ain't gonna work. A guy has to want things his own way." In a more general view, doubt was sneaking up on Frank Nelsen, though as far as KRNH was concerned, he had started the ball rolling. "We'll keep our fingers crossed," he said. It was only a couple Earth days later that another member of the old bunch showed up. "I had to bub all the way from Mercury to Post 1 to get your location from Art, Frankie," he complained. "Cripes, why didn't anybody ever try to beam Gimp and me anymore? Solar radiation ain't that hard to get past. So I had to come sneak a look for myself to see what the big deal on the grapevine is." "We left the back door unlatched for you, Two and Two," Nelsen laughed, "and you crept in quietly. Swell to see you." Sitting showered and in fresh clothes on Frank Nelsen's sun deck, any changes in Two and Two Baines were less evident than one might have supposed. His eyes had a much surer, farther look. Otherwise he was still the same large hulk, with much the same lugubrious humor. "Mercury's okay, Frankie," he said. "About 4,000 people are living in the Twilight Zone already. I could show you pictures, but I guess you know. Whole farms and little towns under stellene. Made me some dough doing lots of the building. Could have been more, but who cares? Oh, Gimp, he'll be along out here sometime soon. He was putting up another solar powerhouse. But he's beginning to say, what the hell, the future ain't there, or on any planet. So this is how it's going to be, huh? With some additions, sure. Factories, supermarkets, cornfields, pig farms, parks, playgrounds, beauty parlors, all encased in stellene and orbiting in clusters around the sun, huh? Hey, Pop, some small fry will say to his old man, give me $10, please, for an ice cream cone down at the soda bub. And his mom will say to his dad, George, dear, is the Iono car nice and shiny? I have to go play bridge with the girls over in Nelsonville. No, I'm not ribbing you, Frankie. It'll be kind of nice to hear that type of talk again, if they only include a place for a man to be a little bit himself. Two and Two, George Baines, sighed rapturously and continued. Figure it out to the end, Frankie. No planets left. All the materials in them used up to build these bub towns. There'll be just big, shining, magnificent rings made up of countless little floating stellene houses all around the sun. A zillion people, maybe more. Gardens, flowers, everything beautiful. Everybody free to move anywhere. Uh-huh. I'm not making fun, Frankie. I'm joining in with all the relief and happiness of my heart. Only, it'll be kind of sad to see the old planets go, to be replaced by a wonderful super suburbia, or maybe we should say superbia. Nelsen burst out laughing at last. You sly slob. Anyhow, that extreme is millenniums off, if it has a chance of happening at all. Even so, our descendants, if any, will be going to the stars by then. There won't be any frustration of their thirst for danger. Just as there isn't any now for us, except that we can keep our weapons handy and hope. Me, I'm a bit bored with adventure just at the present. So am I, Two and Two affirmed fervently. Now, have you got me a job, Frankie? There'll be something, Nelsen answered him. Meanwhile, to keep from feeling regimented by civilization, you could take your rocket launcher and join the perimeter watchers that range out 1,000 miles. Nance Codiss arrived a week later with a group of recent Palestin convalescents. Bad signs came with her, but the fact got lost as she hugged Nelsen quickly there in the dwelling he had set up with the thought that it would be their home. At once she went on a feminine exploring expedition of the prefab's interior and its new gleaming appointments. Kitchen, living room, sun deck. Nelsen's garden was already well along. Like the place, he asked. Love it, Frank, she answered quietly. It could have been more individual, he commented, but we were in a hurry. So they're all identical. That can be fixed some soon. You're thinking about improvements? Her eyes twinkled past the shadow in her expression. Always some, she laughed. Then her face went solemn. Let them ride for now, Frank. It's all wonderful and unbelievable. Hug me again. I love you. Only all this is even more fantastically new to me than it is to you. Realize that, please, Frank. I'm a month late in getting here, and I'm still groping my way. A little more time for us both, because you might be fumbling some, too. Her tone was gentle. He saw that her eyes, meeting his, were honest and clear. He felt the careful strength behind them, after a moment of hurt. There was no rushing, one-way enthusiasm that might easily burn out and blow up in a short time. He held her close. Sure, Nance, he said. You probably know that our group from Mars was followed, Frank. I hope I'm not a jinx. Of course you're not. Somebody would have followed, sometime. We're watching and listening. Just keep your Archer handy." The faint shifting blips in the radar screens was an old story, reminding him that certain things were no better than before, and that some were worse. Somewhere there were other bub towns. There were policing space forces, too. But for millions of miles around, this cluster of 800 prefabs and the numerous larger bubs that served them were all alone. Nelsen looked out from his sun deck and saw dangerous contrasts. The worst, perhaps, was the spherical bubble of stellene. Inside it was a great globe of water surrounded by air, a colossal dewdrop. Within it, a man and two small boys, no doubt father and sons from Paleston, were swimming, horsing around, having a swell time, only a few feet from nothing. Nelsen spoke softly into his radio phone. "Leland, close down the pool." End of Chapter 8, Part 1. Chapter 8, Part 2 of The Planet Strappers. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Planet Strappers by Raymond Z. Gallun. Chapter 8, Part 2. It wasn't long before the perimeter watch, returning from a patrol that had taken them some distance out, brought in a makeshift dwelling bub made from odds and ends of stellene. They had also picked up its occupant, a lean, comic character with an accent and a strange way of talking. "Funny that you'd turn up here, Igor, isn't it?" Nelsen said dryly. Igor sniffed, as if with sorrow. He had been roughed up some. "Very funny, also simple. You making a house, so I am making a house for this identical purpose. People from Ceres are already being here. In consequence, I am also arriving. Nobody are saying what are proper doing and thinking, so I am informed. I am believing. Okay, Igor, when, being not true, I am going away again." The tone was bland, the pale eyes looked naive and artless, except perhaps for a hard, shrewd glint deep down. Joe Kuzak was present. "We searched him, Frank," he said. "His bub, too. He's clean, as far as we can tell. Not even a weapon. I also asked him some questions. I savvy a little of his real lingo." "I'll ask them over," Nelsen answered. "Igor, a friend named Tiflin wouldn't be around someplace, would he?" The large space comedian didn't even hesitate. "I am thinking not very far, not knowing precisely. Somebody more is being here, likewise. Belt Parnay. You are knowing this one? Plenty jollies, new fellas, not having much supplies. Only many new rocket launchers they are receiving from some place. You are understanding this? Bad luck here, it is meaning." Frank eyed the man warily, with mixed doubt and liking. "I don't think you can be going away again right now, Igor," he said. "We don't have a jail, but a guard will be as good." The watch didn't give the alarm for several hours. 3 hisses in the phones made vocally. Then 1, then 2 more. North, second quadrant, that meant. Direction of the first attack. Ionic drives functioned. The cluster of bubs began to scatter further. Nelsen knew that if Igor had told the truth, the outlook was very poor. Too much deployment would thin the defenses too much. And against new homing rockets, if Parnay really had them, it would be almost useless. A relatively small number of men riding free in armor could smash the much larger targets from almost any distance. Nelsen didn't stay in his prefab. Floating in his Archer, he could be his own, less easily identifiable, less easily hit command post, while he fired his own homing missiles at the far-off radar specks of the attackers. He ordered everyone not specifically needed inside the bubs for some defense purpose to jump clear. In the first half-minute, he saw at least 50 compartmented prefabs partly crumble as explosives tore into them. A dozen, torn open, were deflated entirely. The swimming pool globe was punctured, and a cloud of frosty vapor made rainbows in the sunshine as the water boiled away. Far out, Nelsen saw the rockets he and his own men had launched, sparkling soundlessly, no doubt scoring some, too. The attackers didn't even try to get close yet. Far greater damage would have to be inflicted before panic and disorganization might give them sufficient advantage. But such damage would take only minutes. Too much would reduce the loot. So now there was a halt in the firing, and another component of fear was applied. It was a growling, taunting voice. "Nelsen, and all you silly bladderbrains, this is Belt Parnay. Ever hear of him? Come back from hell, huh? Not with just rocks this time. The latest, surest equipment. Want to give up now, Nelsen? You and your nice, civilized people? Cripes, what will you cranks try next? Villages built in nothing and on nothing? Thanks, though, brother. What a blowout this is going to provide." Parnay's tone had shifted, becoming mincingly mocking, then hard and joyful at the end. Maybe he shouldn't have suggested so plainly what would happen unless something was done soon. Maybe he shouldn't have sounded just a little bit unsure of himself under all his bluff, because Nelsen had made preparations that matched a general human trend. Now he saw a condition that fitted in, making an opportunity. So he began to taunt Parnay back. "We've got a lot of the latest type rockets to throw too, Parnay. You'd have quite a time trying to take us, but there's more. Just look behind you, Parnay, and all around. Not too far. Who's silly? Who's the jerk? Some new guys are in your crowd, I hear. Then they won't have much against them. They aren't real outlaws. Do you think they want to keep following you around, stinking in their armor, when what we've got is what they're bound to want right now, too? They can hear what I'm saying, Parnay. Every one of them must have a weapon in his hands. Why, you stupid clown, you're in a trap. We will give them what they need most, without them having to risk getting killed. In space, they will have to be a lot of things forgotten, but not for you, or for the rough old-timers with you. Come on, you guys out there. There's a folded bub right here waiting for each of you. Take it anywhere you want, away from here, of course. Parnay, big, important Belt Parnay, are you still alive?" Nelsen had his own sneering tone of mockery. He used it to best advantage, but with fear in his heart. Plenty of his act was only counter bluff, but now as he paused he heard Two and Two Bain's mournful voice continue the barrage of persuasion. "Flowers, Parnay? We ain't got many yet, but you won't care. Fellas, do you want to keep being pushed around by this loudmouth who likes to run and lets you sweat for him because he's mostly alone and needs company? Believe me, I know what it's like out there too. At a certain point, all you really want is something a little like home. And the chief ain't kidding. It was all planned. Try us and see. Send a couple of the guys in. They'll come out with the proof." Other voices were shouting, "Wake up, you suckers. You'll never take us, you stupid slobs. Come on and try it, if that's what you want to be." What happened could never have happened so quickly if Parnay's doubtless considerably disgruntled following hadn't been disturbed further by intrigue beforehand. Nelsen heard Parnay roar commands and curses that might have awed many a man. But then there was a cluster of minute sparks in the distance, as rockets not launched by the defenders homed and exploded. There was a pause. Then many voices were audible, shouting at the same time with scarcely any words clear. Several minutes passed like that. Then there was almost silence. "So, has it happened?" Nelsen growled into his phone. "It has," came the mocking answer. "Be cavalier, Nelsen. Salute the new top outlaw. Don't faint. I knew I'd make it. And don't try anything you might regret. I'm coming in with a couple of my jolly lads. You'd better not welsh on your promises, because the others are armed and waiting." The guys with Tiflin looked more tired than tough. Out from under their fierce, truculent bravado showed the fierce hunger of common things and comforts. Nelsen knew. The record was in his own memory. "You'll get your bubbs right away," he told them. "Then send the others in, a pair at a time. After that, go and get lost. Make your own place, town, whatever you want to call it. Leland, Corbett, Sharp, fit these guys out, will you?" All this happened under the sardonic gaze of Glen Tiflin, and before the puzzled eyes of Joe Kuzak and Two and Two Baines, a dozen others were hovering near. Nelsen lowered his voice and called, "Nance." She answered at once. "I'm all right, Frank. A few people to patch. Some beyond that. I'm in the hospital with Doc Forbes." "You guys can find something useful to do," Nelsen snapped at the gathering crowd. "Well, Frankie," Tiflin taunted, "aren't you going to invite me into your fancy new quarters?" Joe and Two also looked as though they could stand a drink. On the sun deck, Tiflin spoke again. "I suppose you've got it figured, Nelsen." Nelsen answered him in a clipped fashion. "Thanks, but let's not dawdle too much. I've got a lot of wreckage to put back together. Maybe I've still got it figured wrong, Tiflin, but lately I begin to think the other way. You were always around when trouble was cooking, like part of it, or like a good cop. The first might still be right." Tiflin sneered genially. "Some cops can't carry badges, and they don't always stop trouble, but they try. Anyhow, what side do you think I was on after Fessler kicked me around for months? Let Igor go. He got law and order in his soul. I kind of like having him around. But keep your mouths buttoned, will you? I'm talking to you, Mr. Baines, and you, Mr. Kuzak, as well as to you, Nelsen. And I'll take my bub along, the same as the other 90 or so guys who are left from Parnay's crowd. I've got to look good with them. Cheers, you slobs. See you around." Afterwards, Joe growled. "Hell, what do you know? Him? Special police? Undercover? U.S. UN? Or what?" "Shut up," Nelsen growled. Though he had sensed it coming, and had met it calmly, the Tiflin switch was something that Frank Nelsen had trouble getting over. It confused him. It made him want to laugh. Another thing that began to bother him even more was the realization that the violence represented by Fessler, Fanshaw, Parnay, and thousands of others like them back through history was bound to crop up again. It was part of the complicated paradox of human nature, and it was hard to visualize a time when there wouldn't be followers, frustrated slobs who wanted to get out and kick over the universe. Nelsen had felt such urges cropping up within himself, so this wasn't the end of trouble, especially not out here in raw space. This was still far too big for man-made order. So it wasn't just the two opposed space navies patrolling more quietly now between Ceres and Pallas. That condition could pass. The way people always choose, or were born to, different sides was another matter. Or was it just the natural competition of life in whatever form? More disturbing, perhaps, was the mere fact of trying to live here, so close to natural forces that could kill in an instant. For example, Nelsen often saw 2 children and a dog racing around inside one of the rotating bubs, having fun as if just in a backyard. If the stellene were ripped, the happy picture would change to horror. How long would it take to get adjusted to and accept such a chance? Thoughts like that began to disturb Nelsen. Out here, in all this enormous freedom, the shift from peaceful routine to tragedy could be quicker than ever before. But it wasn't thinking about such grim matters that actually threw Frank Nelsen. That got him truly mixed up. It was Parnay's attack. 10 men and 2 women had been killed. There were also 27 injured. Such facts he could accept. They didn't disturb him too much either. Yet there was a curious sort of straw that broke the camel's back, one might have said. The incident took place quite a while after the assault, out on an inspection tour in his Archer. He happened to glance through the transparent wall of the sun deck of a prefab he was passing. In a moment he was inside, grinning happily, Miss Rosalie Parks was lecturing him. "You needn't be surprised that I am here, Franklin. O tempora, o mores, Cicero once said. Oh, the times, oh, the customs. But we needn't be so pessimistic. I am in perfect health and 10 years below retirement age. Young people, I suspect, will still be taught Latin if they choose, or there will be something else. Of course, I had heard of your project. It was quite easy for you not to notice my arrival, but I came with the latest group, straight from Earth." Nelsen was very pleased that Miss Parks was here. He told her so. He stayed for cakes and coffee. He told her that it was quite right for her to keep up with the times. He believed this himself. Afterwards, though, in his own quarters, he began to laugh. Her presence was so incongruous, so fantastic. His laughter became wild. Then it changed to great rasping hiccups. Too much that was unbelievable by old standards had happened around him. This was delayed reaction to space. He had heard of such a thing, but he had hardly thought that it could apply to him any more. Well, he knew what to do. Tranquilizer tablets were particularly forgotten things to him, but he gulped one now. In a few minutes he seemed okay again. Yet he couldn't help thinking back to the bunch, the Planet Strappers, to the wild fulfillment they had sought. So most of them had made it. They had become men the hard way, except of course Eileen, the distaff side. They had planned callowly to meet and compare adventures in 10 years, and this was still less than 7. How long had it been since he had even beamed old Paul in Jarviston? Now that most of the Syrtis fever had left him, it seemed futile even to consider such a thing. It involved memories buried in enormous time, distance, change, and unexpectedness. Glenn Tiflin, the sour, space-wild punk, had become a cop. Had Tiflin even saved his, Frank Nelsen's, life once long ago, persuading a jolly lad leader to cast him adrift for a joke rather than kill him and Ramos outright? Charlie Reynolds, the Bunch member whom everybody had thought most likely to succeed. Well, Charlie was dead from a simple thing and buried on Venus. He was unknown, except to his acquaintances. Jig Hollins, the guy who played it safe, was just as dead. Eileen Sands was a celebrity in Serene, in Palestine, and the whole belt. Mex Ramos, of the flapping squirrel tails on an old motor scooter, now belonged to the history of exploration, though he no longer had real hands or feet, and very likely was now dead somewhere out toward interstellar space. David Lester, the timid one, had become successful in his own way, and was the father of one of the first children to be born in the belt. 2 and 2 Baines had won enough self-confidence to make cracks about the future. Gimp Hines, once the saddest case in the whole bunch, had been, for a long time perhaps, the best adjusted to the big vacuum. Art Kuzak, one-time hunky football player, was a power among the asteroids. His brother Joe had scarcely changed personally. About himself, Nelsen got the most lost. What had he become after his wrong guesses and his great luck, and the fact that he had managed to see more than most? Generally, he figured that he was still the same freewheeling vagabond by intention, but too serious to quite make it work out. Sometimes he actually gave people orders. It came to him as a surprise that he must be almost as rich as old J. John Reynolds, who was still drawing wealth from a comparatively small loan, futilely at his age, unless he had really aimed at the idea of bettering the future. Nelsen's busy mind couldn't stop. He thought of 3 other world cultures he had glimpsed. 2 had destroyed each other. The third and strangest was still to be reckoned with. There, he came to Mitch Storey, the colored guy with a romantic name. Of all the Planet Strappers, his history was the most fabulous. Maybe now, with a way of living in open space started, and with the planets ultimately to serve only as sources of materials, Mitch's star people would be left in relatively peace for centuries. Frank Nelsen began to chuckle again, as if something, everything, was funny, which perhaps it was in a way, because the whole view, personal and otherwise, seemed too huge and unpredictable for his wits to grasp. It was as if neither he nor any other person belonged where he was at all. He checked his thoughts in time, otherwise he would have commenced hiccuping. That was the way it went for a considerable succession of arbitrary 24-hour day periods. As long as he kept his attention on the tasks in hand, he was okay. He felt fine. Still, the project was proceeding almost automatically just now. The first cluster of prefabs had grown until it had been split into halves, which moved 1,000,000 miles apart, circling the sun. And he knew that there were other clusters built by other outfits, growing and dividing into widely separated portions of the same great ring-like zone. Maybe the old problems were beat. Safety? If deployment was the answer to that, it was certainly there, to a degree at least. Room enough? Check, it was certainly available. Freedom of mind and action? There wasn't much question that that would work out too. Home comfort and a kind of life not too unfamiliar? In the light of detached logic and observation, that was going fine too. In the main, people were adjusting very quickly and eagerly, perhaps too quickly. That was where Nelsen always got scared, as if he had become a nervous old man. The big vacuum had grandeur. It could seem gentle. Could children, women and men, everybody sometimes forget, learn to live with it without losing their respect for it, until suddenly it killed them? That was the worst point, if he let himself think, and how could he always avoid that? From there his thoughts would branch out into his multiple uncertainties, confusions and puzzlements. Then those strangling hiccups would come, and who could be taking devil killers all the time? He hadn't avoided Nance Codiss. He talked with her every day, lunched with her, even held her hand. Otherwise, a restraint had come over him, because something was all wrong with him, and was getting worse. Just one urge was clear, now, inside him. She knew, of course, that he was loused up, but she didn't say anything. Finally, he told her. "You were right, Nance. I was fumbling my way, too. Space fatigue, the medic told me just a little while ago. He agrees with me that I should go back to Earth. I've got to go, to take a look at everything from the small end again. Of course, I've always had the longing, and now I can go. It has been a year since the worst of the Syrtis fever." "I've had the fever, and sometimes the longing, Frank," she said after she had studied him for a moment. "I think I'd like to go." "Okay, if you want to, Nance. It's me that's flunking out, pal." He chuckled apologetically, almost lightly. "My part has to be a one-person deal. I don't know whether I'll ever come back, and you seem to fit out here." She looked at him coolly for almost a minute. "All right, Frank," she said quietly. "Follow your nose. It's just liable to be right on the beam, for you. I might follow mine, I don't know." "Joe and Two are around if you need anything, Nance," he said. "I'll tell them. Gimp, I hear, is on the way. Not much point in my waiting for him, though." Somehow he loved Nance Codiss as much or more than ever. But how could he tell her that and make sense? Not much made sense to him anymore. It seemed that he had to get away from everybody that he had ever seen in space. 50 hours before his departure, with a returning bub caravan that had brought more Earth immigrants, Nelsen acquired a traveling companion who had arrived from Palestin with a small caravan bringing machinery. The passenger hostess brought him to Nelsen's prefab. He was a grave little guy, 5 years old. He was solemn, polite, frightened, tall for his age. Funny how corn and kids grew at almost zero gravity. The boy handed Nelsen a letter. "From my father and mother, sir," he said. Nelsen read the typed missive. "Dear Frank, the rumor has come that you are going home. You have our very best wishes, as always. Our son Davy is being sent to his paternal grandmother, now living in Minneapolis. He will go to school there. He is capable of making the trip without any special attention, but a small imposition. If you can manage it, please look in on him once in a while on the way. We would appreciate this favor. Thank you. Take care of yourself, and we shall hope to see you somewhere within the next few months. Your sincere friends, David and Helen Lester. A lot of nerve, Nelsen thought at first, but he tried to grin engagingly at the kid and almost succeeded. "We're in luck, Dave," he said. "I'm going to Minneapolis, too. I'm afraid of a lot of things. What are you afraid of?" The small fry's jutting lip trembled. "Earth," he said. "A great big planet. Hoppers tell me that I won't even be able to stand up or breathe." Nelsen very nearly laughed and went into hiccups again. Fantastic. Another viewpoint. Seeing through the other end of the telescope. But how else would it be for a youngster born in the Belt, while being sent, in the old colonial pattern, to the place that his parents regarded as home? "Those jokers," Nelsen scoffed. "They're pulling your leg. It just isn't so, Davy. Anyhow, during the trip, the big bub will be spun fast enough so that we will get used to the greater Earth gravity. Let me tell you something. I guess it's space and the Belt that I'm afraid of. I never quite got over it. Silly, huh?" But as Nelsen watched the kid brighten, he remembered that he himself had been scared of Earth, too. Scared to return, to show weakness, to lack pride. Well, to hell with that. He had accomplished enough now, maybe to cancel such objections. Now it seemed that he had to get to Earth before it vanished because of something he had helped start. Silly, of course. He and Davy traveled fast and almost in luxury. Within 2 weeks they were in orbit around the bulk of the old world. Then, in the powerful tender with its nuclear retard rockets, there was the blast in, the reverse of that costly agony that had once meant hard-won and enormous freedom, when he was poor in money and rich in mighty yearning. But now Nelsen yielded in all to the mother clutch of the gravity. The whole process had been gentled and improved. There were special anti-knock seats. There was sound and vibration insulation. Even Davy's slight fear was more than half thrill. At the new Minneapolis port, Nelsen delivered David Lester, Jr. into the care of his grandmother, who seemed much more human than Nelsen once had thought long ago. Then he excused himself quickly. Seeking the shelter of anonymity, he bought a rucksack for his few clothes and boarded a bus which dropped him at Jarviston, Minnesota, at 2 a.m. He thrust his hands into his pockets, partly like a lonesome tramp, partly like some carefree immortal, and partly like a mixed-up wraith who didn't quite know who or what he was or where he belonged. In his wallet he had about $500. How much more he might have commanded he couldn't even guess. Whoops, fella, he told himself. That's too weird, too indigestible. Don't start hiccuping again. How old are you, 25? Or 25,000 years? Whoops, careful. The full moon was past zenith, looking much as it always had. The blue-tinted air domes of colossal industrial development were mostly too small at this distance to be seen without a glass. Good. With wondering absorption, he sniffed the mingling of ripe field and road smells, borne on the warm breeze of the late August night. Some few cars evidently still ran on gasoline. For a moment he watched neon signs blink. In the desertion he walked past Lehman's drugstore and Otto Kramer's bar and crossed over to pause for a nameless moment in front of Paul Hendricks' Hobby Center, which was all dark and seemed little changed. He took to a side street and won back the rustle of trees and the click of his heels in the silence. A few more buildings. That was about all that was visibly different in Jarviston, Minnesota. A young cop eyed him as he returned to the main drag and paused near a street lamp. He had a flash of panic, thinking that the cop was somebody grown up now who would recognize him, but at least it was no one that he remembered. The cop grinned. "Get settled into a hotel, buddy," he said, "or else move on out of town." Nelsen grinned back and ambled out to the highway, where intermittent clumps of traffic whispered. There he paused and looked up at the sky again. The electric beacon of a weather observation satellite blinked on and off, moving slowly. Venus had long since set, with hard-to-see Mercury preceding it. Jupiter glowed in the south. Mars looked as remote and changeless as it must have looked in the Stone Age. The asteroids were never even visible here without a telescope. The people that he knew and the events that he had experienced out there were like myths now. How could he ever put here and there together and unite the mismatched halves of himself and his experience? He had been born on Earth, the single home of his kind from the beginning. How could he ever have been out there? He didn't try to hitch a ride. He walked 14 miles to the next town, bought a small tent, provisions, and a special miniaturized radio. Then he slipped into the woods along Hickman's Lake, where he used to go. There he camped through September and deep into October. He fished, he swam again, he dropped stones into the water and watched the circles form, with a kind of puzzled groping in his memory. He retreated from the staggering magnificence of his recent past and clutched at old simplicities. On those rare occasions when he shaved, he saw the confused sickness in his face reflected by his mirror. Sometimes, for a moment, he felt hot and then cold, as if his blood still held a tiny trace of citrus fever. If there was such a thing. No, don't start to laugh, he warned himself. Relax. Let phantoms fade away. Somewhere the multiple bigness of nothing, of life and death, of success and unfairness and surprise, must have reality, but not here. Occasionally he listened to news on the radio, but mostly he shut it off, out, until boredom at last began to overtake him, because he had been used to so much more than what was here. Until specifically one morning, when the news came too quickly and with too much impact. It was a recording, scratchy and full of unthinkable distance. Frank, Gimp, 2 and 2, Paul, Mr. Reynolds, Otto, Les, Joe, Art, everybody, especially you, Eileen. Remember what you promised when I get back, Eileen? Here I am on Pluto, edge of the star desert, clear sailing all the way. All I see yet is twilight, rocks, mountains, snow which must be frozen atmosphere, and one big star, Sol. But I'll get the data and be back. Nelsen listened to the end with panic in his face, as if such adventures and such living were too gigantic and too rich. He hiccuped once, then he held himself very still and concentrated. He had known that voice, out there, and here too. Now he heard it again, here, but from out there. It became like a joining force to bring them both together within himself. Though, how could it be? Ramos, he said aloud, made it. Another good guy, accomplishing what he wanted. Hey, that's swell. Like things should happen. He didn't hiccup anymore or laugh. By being very careful, he just grinned instead. He arose to his feet slowly. What am I doing here, wasting time? He seemed to ask the woods. Without picking up his camping gear at all, he headed for the road, thumbed a ride to Jarviston, where he arrived before 8 o'clock. Somebody had started ringing the city hall bell. Celebration? Hendricks was the most logical place for Nelsen to go, but he passed it by, following a hunch to his old street. She had almost said that she might come home, too. He touched the buzzer. Not looking too completely disheveled himself, he stood there as a girl, briskly early in dress. An impulse, so as not to waste the bright morning, opened the door. "Yeah, Nance, me," he croaked apologetically. "Ramos has reached Pluto." "I know, Frankie," she burst out. But his words rushed on. "I've been goofing off by Hickman's Lake. Over now. Emotional indigestion, I guess, from living too big before I could take it. I figured you might be here. If you weren't, I'd come, because I know where I belong, Nance. I hope you're not angry. Maybe we're pulling together at last." "Angry when I was the first fumbler? How could that be, Frank? Oh, I knew where you were. Folks found out. I told them to leave you alone because I understood some of what you were digging through. Because it was a little the same for me. So you see, I didn't just tag after you." She laughed a little. "That wouldn't be proud, would it? Even though Joe and 2 and 2 said I had to go bring you back." His arms went tight around her, right there on the old porch. "Nance, love you," he whispered. "And we've got to be tough. Everybody's got to be tough, to match what we'd come to, even little kids. But it was always like that on any kind of frontier, wasn't it? A few will get killed, but more will live. Many more." Like that, Frank Nelsen shook the last of the cobwebs out of his brain, and got back to his greater destiny. "I'll buy all that philosophy," Nance chuckled gently, "but you still look as though you need some breakfast, Frank." He grinned. "Later. Let's go see Paul first. A big day for him, because of Ramos. Paul is getting feeble, I suppose." Nelsen's face had sobered. "Not so you could notice it much, Frank," Nance answered. "There's a new therapy, another side of what's coming, I guess." They walked the few blocks. The owner of the Hobby Center was now a long-time member of KRNH Enterprises. He had the means to expand and modernize the place beyond recognition. But clearly he had realized that some things should not change. In the display window, however, there gleamed a brand new Archer 9, beautiful as a garden or a town floating, unsupported, under the stars. Beautiful as the future, which was born of the past. A bunch of the fellows, the current crop of aficionados, were inside the store, making lots of noise over the news. Was that Chip Potter, grown tall? Was that his same old dog, Blaster? Frank Nelsen could see Paul Hendricks' white-fringed bald spot. "Go ahead, open the door. Or are you still scared?" Nance challenged lightly. "No, just anticipating," Nelsen gruffed. "And seeing if I can remember what's out there. Serene, Bub, Belt, Palace." He spoke the words like comic incantations, yet with a dash of reverence. "Superbia," Nancy teased. "That is somebody's impertinent joke," he growled in feigned solemnity. "Anyhow, it would be too bad if something that important couldn't take a little ribbing. Shucks, we've hardly started to work yet." He drew Nance back a pace, out of sight of those in the store, and kissed her long and rather savagely. "With all its super complications, life still seems pretty nice," he commented. The door squeaked, just as it used to, as Nelsen pushed it open. The old overhead bell jangled. Pale, watery eyes lifted and lighted with another fulfillment. "Well, Frank, long time no see." End of Chapter 8, Part 2. Recording by Richard Kilmer, Rio Medina, Texas. End of The Planet Strappers by Raymond Z. Gallun.